Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chicanery. We are your hosts. I'm Danny, and we have JT.
Hello, once again.
Alrighty, so we have, as a part of kind of a big bonanza weekend, there was a substantial amount of racing kind of over the last few weeks since we have recorded. But we this episode we will focus on the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix. Um, But before we get into the actual race weekend itself, because as I like to say, the F1 news cycle is kind of the gift that continues to give, particularly this year. There's a bit of kind of preamble that was in the background.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Thinking About Buying, the number one and only retail store that exists entirely in your subconscious. Thinking About Buying is your personal place for all the things you're, well, thinking about buying. Sometimes there's things you want to buy but haven't even thought about, and that's where I come in. People buy stuff all the time, right? Pickup trucks, horses, condos in Barbados. None of those things are more important than our favorite item here at TAB, and that's t-shirts. And not just any t-shirts, we're talking t-shirts from our great friends at Homefield Apparel. Now, if you don't know these folks, maybe you haven't thought about them, wink wink, before, you're going to love them. You like sports? Well, they love sports. They have printed authentic designs from over 80 collegiate schools, and now they're doing motorsports lines as well. And what a better way to kick off the month of May from an Indianapolis-based apparel company than doing a line for the Indy 500 that drops just a few short days away on May 3rd. And the best part about ordering from them is it's just as easy as thinking about ordering from them. You can go to homefieldapparel.com or their app, look at these designs, find one that you like, one that suits you the best, and order it just like that. And hey, be sure to use our code VLV24 at checkout or 15% off your first order. That's homefieldapparel.com and VLV24. Now, if you don't mind, it's time for my lunch break. Don't tell Art.
So the first thing was that the 2025 calendar was released, I guess, as of the time of this recording, about a week or so ago. Um, and it's just the fallout. Everyone disliked that. Um, It is a 25 race calendar, if I recall correctly, with there being 4 rounds in the space of a month, just about. It is a very packed calendar. Now, F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali has made no bones about him pushing for effectively global domination in F1, and this is but the latest sort of salvo in that.
Yeah, and then they also have apparently, I think, one of the rounds, or maybe one or two of the F1 rounds actually conflict with the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which, I mean, I guess technically that's not that pressing of an issue because currently no F1 drivers are kind of splitting between doing endurance racing and F1, but usually Le Mans, because it's the biggest race on the planet, usually no racing series ever conflicts with it. I mean, F1 in the past has conflicted with it, so it just came back, which, you know what? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. F1 is just, I guess, screw Le Mans. I mean, we're bigger than Le Mans, I guess.
Yeah, they pretty much. It's in some ways it's kind of like the Group C days where they basically homogenized the Group C engine formula with F1, and everybody was like, okay, we'll bump this, and that was how Group C died. Um, you should, if any folks are curious about any of that, Jalopnik for a while was doing a wonderful Group C mess thing that they used to do every year on Christmas. That was just filled with lots of Group C minutia. It's great. You should go find it. Um, but yeah, no, everybody hates it. Fans don't really love it. The media doesn't love it. And the drivers are again sounding off. As much as he annoys me sometimes, especially when it comes to the sort of inner machinations of a Formula One, Verstappen is usually really cooking because he absolutely despises it. um, to which Domenicali responded, "Racing in F1 is not compulsory."
I
And
mean, one thing about Verstappen that like I don't really care for him as a racing driver and all, but like I honestly respect his ability to be like brutally honest about things and just like say his mind because most of the time like I end up agreeing with the shit that he says because I'm like, yeah, like I mean, I may not like you as a person or a racing driver, but I mean, you're kind of spot on.
yeah, Verstappen, he basically said that the races were too close together, and that there are just too many of them. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong at all. And certainly telling arguably the biggest star in F1 right now at quotes, racing in F1 is not compulsory, is not really the mic drop that I think Domenicali thought it was.
No, it did not eat the way he thought it would, but whatever.
Yeah, I was just about to say this is just typical Stefano Domenicali garbage, quite honestly.
Honestly, I feel like it's interesting how I feel like a lot of racing series are either like on the like they're like I feel like a lot of them are just like they don't have like any sort of in between with a lot of their schedules. Like a lot of them are either like they have too little and a lot of the races like have massive gaps in between them and it
IndyCar.
kind of gets a little bit hard to like you know, be invested in the series if you really are not like if you're more like a casual fan, it tends to get a little bit difficult to stay engaged and again keep up with it when there are like massive gaps. Like, IndyCar, we've talked about it before. They have massive gaps in their schedule, and as good as racing that IndyCar produces, it does kill off a lot of momentum. Um, and then some of them have too much, like F1, that's a lot of racing, and NASCAR. NASCAR
Mm.
races like what 30 weekends out of the whole like year. Like that's a lot. And it's honestly overkill, which I mean, maybe some people will agree with that, maybe not. I mean, that's just how I feel personally.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong necessarily. Yeah, it's tough. I don't think really any series strikes a particularly nice middle ground in sort of events, kind of events per year. Yeah, because F1, it's entirely too much. NASCAR, I agree, because it's 36 points paying weekends, but then you got the All Star race and the Clash. So then those are two exhibition races. So 38 weeks, 38 weeks of racing out of 52 weeks in a year, which is a lot. Domenicali is hell bent on trying to get 30 races a year, which is madness. But then you've got IndyCar, which we only just had our second points paying race of the year. So it's like, come on, guys. But I don't know. I don't really know what the answer to that question is, how you solve that. But I
I
don't
just
feel like
going to be talking a lot about scheduling and race dates because then we'll talk about touch on it in another episode later about some scheduling conflict silliness, but we'll get to that.
yeah. But I guess so speaking of silliness, Coda has currently got themselves embroiled in a little bit of a ticket fiasco. So I should have probably pasted this in the notes, but they basically put out a tweet about basically, yeah, we'll back your tickets, thanks. And basically, the gist of it is that they oversold general admission
Which
and are
personally, I feel like there is, some scam likely. I feel like there's probably some scam, no pun intended, chicanery going on with that because what I feel like they're going to end up doing is they are going to buy back the general admission tickets from people just to sell them back at a higher price point. Like, I just don't think, like, no, y'all are not slick. I know that's exactly what they're going to end up doing.
hmm yeah, yeah. This is even as far as sort of general corporate fuckery goes, this is pretty apparent, if I'm to be honest. Um, yeah, I don't. Well, like I said, the whole goal is to sell the tickets. I know exactly what their goal is, but it's just like, did you guys really have to make this so obvious? And people have predictably seen right through it almost immediately. And the response to this is, well, it's gone down like a lead balloon. So I don't know. I guess watch this space, but I have a feeling that Coda will be issuing a notes app apology here before too long, especially if we all turn out to be correct. Um, but moving on, there was particularly kind of in the lead up to the race weekend with a bit of actually quite a bit of chatter through the weekend, but moving F1's moving to revamp the point system, and it looks like this could potentially happen as soon as next season. The idea being to give out points up to 12th place as opposed to P10 under the current system. And even the particularly Horner and Wolf have both said that they're not looking to block the move. So if the top teams are good with it, and certainly all the midfield teams that this will really benefit are obviously on board. So it would be a go. And I guess for a refresher, if you're not clear with how the current point system works, it works up to 10th place, first through 10th. It's for P1 for a race win, you get 25 points. For P2, 18, 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1. And then you get an additional point if you notch the fastest lap, which was something that was introduced 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. It's a fairly recent thing. But under the proposed point system, it would be 25 points for first place, 18 for second, 15 for third, 12 for fourth, 10 for fifth, and then for sixth is 8, seventh is sixth. But then from 8th to 12th, it would be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it more equitably divvies out the points as that's the point for fear of sounding redundant. The idea is it'll incentivize the midfield scrap a little bit more. It'll reward those folks who basically fight a little bit harder to try to claw for points. And it also, the idea is it'll be easier for fans to sort of understand the shakeout of the constructors' titles, because a lot of folks have trouble, and truth be told, it took me a while to figure this out too, understanding, okay, well, if all these, numbnuts have 0 points, then how is, I don't know, Williams ahead of Sauber ahead of Haas? It makes conveying classification a little bit easier is the idea. So
I mean, personally, I don't understand why F1 is worried about the point system of the series. Like, in my opinion, that feels like very asinine, and I feel like there could be better things. There are better things for them to be worried about and trying to fix. The point system, I feel like, is really not all that serious. Like, if we were to rank on a scale of like 1 to 10, the order of how important things are in F1, of things that need to be addressed, I would rank the point system either to be 9 or 10 on being like the least important pressing issue to address. I mean, sure, if you want to do that because you feel like it will make more sense to fans, then fine, I guess. What you do, you. But personally, I feel like there are better things that they could be using their time for.
yeah, I agree. It seems like a pretty minor thing and a fair bit of hullabaloo. I mean, it was so much so that even on the race broadcast during the Chinese Grand Prix, Crofty and Rosberg segued a bit and were talking about the points. And it's like, huh, okay. So it's causing quite the stir, which is not super surprising because, to be fair, this current point system we've had for a while. Yeah, it was the early to mid aughts. I don't remember exactly what year, because to be fair, there were actually a flurry of point season changes kind of around the turn of the millennium. So trying to figure out quite where this one's stacked, even my motorsports history brain is having kind of a tough time with that. But at any rate, point being is that, yeah, this does seem like it's pretty low down the pecking order of things that need tweaking in the sport. But I mean, I don't hate it, I guess. But I don't know. It's just one of those things that kind of is. And we'll talk about it a bunch for the first 2 rounds should this be approved, and then that'll basically be it. Everybody will forget about it and then go back to complaining about everything else. But now, as for the sort of news roundup for things that they were released actually like in the case of both of these, like right as we were recording last episode and like right after, and I meant to insert a bit of a editor's note here and then just forgot, but it is kind of important to cover in sort of the broader scheme of F1. The first of all was that Andretti Global announced a bid for an F2 outfit, which is a choice. This is like the motorsports equivalent of force majeure. Um, it basically is like come hell or high water, they are going to find their way on the grid somehow. And I mean, I respect the hell out of it, but I don't see this ending quite the way old Michael wants. I don't know. It seems like this just the juice doesn't seem worth the squeeze, if I'm being perfectly honest.
I mean,
Um,
I guess they're doing it because like hope in the hope that it will make them look more serious and I guess be able to I mean, I already consider them to be decently serious just because it's Andretti, but apparently the folks over at the FIA, FOM think otherwise. But I mean, I I mean, I guess I can kind of see it because it's like, okay, it's you build up like a ladder system for to like hopefully like funnel in like I guess like American drivers in the F1 because I guess that seems to be easier than uh, the current route. So I mean, we'll see how it goes.
yeah, like I said, I mean, I appreciate it, and of course, we've talked about it during the episode that we did kind of about the Andretti mess. Certainly, I think it would be cool to have them on the grid. And from certainly the range of responses, it seems like you would be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't want them on the grid. But the FIA has made it, or actually FOM rather, Liberty, and then the teams and Concord has made it very clear that they aren't all that interested. So I'm not sure that F2 is necessarily the move, and if they're going to be able to get that one done either.
And then like F2 does like I don't know if it's gonna be an issue or not. I mean, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I feel like I mean F2 is also like fairly expensive to like run in that series and like I mean we know from Nick DeFries having to essentially take out a loan in the same way that you would take out a student loan to go to college. He had to do that for F2 and had that whole debacle going down with probably unfortunately getting involved with a predatory loaner. So it's like there's also that's also going to cost a lot of money for the drivers. So it's like they might end up doing this and the drivers don't actually end up getting to F1 because of just how expensive it is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I guess we'll see what happens. If this all comes off the way everybody hoped, then certainly the Andretti folks will look like a bunch of visionaries, and if they don't, then well, everybody will look a bit silly. But moving on, I guess the final bit of off-track news is that Alonso has re-upped with Aston Martin. Certainly in the silly season driver shuffle, he had been tipped to maybe replace Checo, then maybe take Lewis's seat. And nope, none of the above. He is staying put. Um, he is calling this the longest contract of his career, which, given that we seem to be entering an era where nobody talks about the duration of contract anymore. But for what it's worth, it was his, I think, Ferrari contract was 4 years with an option, if I remember correctly. So this is in theory at least that long. Um, which will have him on the grid for a while longer. But he also noted that this was probably would be his last contract. Um, so, I mean, given the fact that we've, in theory, at least got 5 years more of Alonso, certainly no need to start, you know, pouring out tall boys over Alonso's career. But it sounds like this will be basically the swan song contract. And ostensibly about 5 more years if he wants to try to bag one more world title before he finally actually calls it a day. So there you have it. But moving on, I guess finally to get into kind of on track stuff. We are back in Shanghai. This is the first Grand Prix since 2019 held here. Um, and that was, of course, that was the 1000th Formula One World Championship race. Last time we were at Shanghai, and needless to say that the Formula One and the general global landscape is very different from 2019. Um, but then this also marks, additionally, the first sprint weekend of 2024. Which, and before we get into it, because this is an axe I need to grind just a little bit. Holy mother of pearl is writing show notes for sprint weekends, an absolute gargantuan pain in the neck. Nothing like having basically 3 sessions turn into like 5. Um, but with my bit of kvetching out of the way, as a result of Shanghai being off the calendar for so long, that even despite the fact that these 4 drivers have all been in the sport now for minimum, this is their second year, they have never driven the Chinese Grand Prix circuit. Yuki Tsunoda, Logan Sargent, Zhou Guanyu, and Oscar Piastri. So, a decent amount of the grid that's just never been here. And that becomes actually kind of important later. But anyway, moving on to sort of the practice sessions. First, it's worth noting that during the practice session, there was a grass fire on the inside of Turn 7, which brought out a red flag for about 5 minutes during the session. Which is very funny, and nobody quite knows what caused it. But at any rate, Stroll managed to top the session for reasons unclear to basically anybody. Although admittedly it was a practice session. Gasly actually brought up the rear because he was having ERS issues. And because it's a practice session, so it means this is very definitely the race and you should be elbows out totally. Piastri and Lewis were squabbling over track position on the front straight. And to the point that Hamilton radioed that he had just gotten pushed off. And he was actually given a black and white flag for crossing over the pit entry line when that happened. I talk about, Piastri being a kind of a Shanghai neophyte, but apparently even Alonso forgot where the track went because he got caught out by the pit entry and ended up on the escape road that leads just off, which was very, very funny. But otherwise, not really all that much to report from practice because we had sprint quali. And it's worth noting that these were rain-affected sessions. It started raining pretty early in SQ1, with the intensity picking up quite significantly at the end of SQ2 and basically turned SQ3 into a washout. Also, the grass on the inside of Turn 7 caught on fire again. Which caused the start of SQ2 to be delayed by about 15 minutes while the FIA desperately tries to figure out what's causing the grass to catch fire there.
Somebody suggested that it might have been like methanol, or it might be ethanol. I can't remember which one, but I think it might have been one of something like that. Ethanol probably, because I think it's colorless and it doesn't smell like anything when fire does start. So that could have been it.
Yeah, so there was quite a bit of conjecture. So it's worth noting that as of when I wrapped up these notes at about noon, so it's Monday, April 22nd at about 7 o'clock Eastern time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. I wrapped up these notes around noon, 12:30. There hadn't been any official cause listed for why the fires started, but the FIA was conducting a full investigation into it. But yes, it's built on the Shanghai circuit's built on what was effectively marshland, and there's lots of methane. And that in concert with the sparks, because it's worth noting that Turn 7 is kind of uphill off camber, so you get a big compression where you dart up. My brain tried to mix Jut and Dart, even though neither of those is correct. But yeah, we're following the circuit. There's a pretty aggressive compression a la like the foxhole at the Nordschleife. And the cars, they do bottom out a little bit, and there's some sparks. And so you put the two together, sparks from the floor, from the skid blocks plus methane. Yeah, it'll ignite. Um, but it was just very funny to see it happen twice in confused marshals trying to put the fire out. Is just it's quite a sight. But it did cause the start of SQ2 to be delayed, as well as, like I said, practice to be red flagged briefly. But at any rate, Norris and Lewis occupied the front row. Yeah, a bit of weirdness with Norris, because as much as I said it was raining, and coming out of the final corner, actually coming into the final corner rather, Lando had a bit of an excursion through the gravel. And as a result of the track limits violation, the stewards deleted his lap, and that was what gave Lewis provisional pole for quite a while. But then the stewards had a moment of, oh wait, Lando actually lost time in that. So then they gave the lap back. But by that point, it was the track conditions, tongue twister there, had deteriorated to the point where Lewis was not going to be able to go out and go any faster. But that was Lando P1, Lewis P2. Verstappen, as a result of weather and the fact that even the RB20 still doesn't really get its front tires up to temperature super duper well. It's better than the RB19 was last year, but it's still not great. As a result of that, he only ended up rolling off P4. But there were definitely some shenanigans as the deteriorating track conditions saw Leclerc spin off into the barriers at turn 9. And he would roll off P6, I do believe. And amazingly, these conditions favored the Saubers. Bottas and Zhou Guanyu occupied 9th and 10th respectively, which was quite a showing for the hometown hero. It's funny. Russell was trying to do some kind of last-second heroics in the sprint quali sessions, basically rolling out right at the end. It worked for him in SQ1, and he was able to get through, and he knocked Tsunoda out, who had a pretty miserable go of it. But he got caught out by track conditions and was actually himself got eliminated by Zhou Guanyu heading into SQ3. But as for the sprint race, we roll off, and Lando proceeds to basically immediately bottle it going into turn 1. He tried to run it up along the outside of Lewis and just completely screwed it. It went from P1 to P7 in the space of a half of a straight and a corner. And Lewis would lead for about half of the sprint race, leading from Alonso. Verstappen was struggling for pace, something fierce initially. But as it turns out, he was just fiddling with engine modes. As a result of the limited practice time, Red Bull clearly hadn't had the opportunity to get that all quite sorted. But once he figured it on, he lit the afterburners, and everybody was kind of screwed. Yeah, he would lead from Alonso, but a lockup into turn 1 all but handed Verstappen the lead on a silver platter. But to be clear, Verstappen was quicker by a country mile. He was lapping like a second half faster than Lewis, who was in second. And in the space of 10 laps, put like 13 seconds on the field. It was kind of silly. But there was still some action because there was a 4-way scrap between Alonso, Sainz, Perez, and Leclerc. Perez, being, well, frankly, kind of as useless as ever in the second Red Bull, had found himself at like P7 at one point, and was just like not making any headway to try to overtake Sainz, but was also like under continual threat of getting overtaken by Leclerc. But with about 4 or 5 laps to go, it was getting very busy with this little quartet, because Sainz was starting to get impatient, and Alonso's defense was starting to run a bit ragged. to the point that the two actually had a bit of a coming together, which resulted in a puncture for Alonso. He would actually end up retiring the car about a lap later. But in doing so, it allowed Perez rather to slip through for P3, with Sainz taking P4, Leclerc taking P5. Now, interestingly enough, at the end of the sprint, for all of this, Alonso did get a penalty. It was a 10-second penalty at the end of the sprint. I'm not sure how it was applied, because he did retire, but he had completed 90% race distance, so he technically was classified. But he was classified P20 because he was the only retirement. So yeah, I don't really know quite how they did that, but I mean, whatever. But yeah, that was a sprint. Short, and well, the battle for, I guess, the last of the quotes points paying in the sprint, because in the sprint it's only points up to P8. It was short but sweet. And then after that, we get on to actual qualifying. And whatever pace Lewis had in the sprint just left him for qualifying. Now, to be fair, he said that they were messing with the setup. They made some big swings. In one of his interviews, he was like, okay, well, surely the car can't get any worse, right? And then the car got worse. It was that post-race interview is or post-quali interview, sorry, is very, very funny. Lewis is very much in his unbothered era at the moment. Just kind of laughing with journalists. But this was his first Q1 exit since Jeddah in 2022. Yeah, Yuki, once again, just having a miserable time. But it's worth noting that Shanghai circuit is kind of high deg, even more so than some of the other circuits early on the calendar. And, well, Yuki had never been here, so it was giving him all manner of sort of fits and starts trying to figure out the circuit. So he only ended up qualifying P19, which marked the first time that he has been out-qualified by Daniel Ricciardo. Gasly got through to Q2 for the first time this year. He was P15. Sainz would emulate Charles's spin into the barriers, and would bring out a red flag, although he would get the car fixed and would finish out Q2 and P3, although after the Q3 shuffle, it would end up being a Red Bull front row lockout with Alonso occupying P3. And then sort of moving on to race day, Norris was able to get ahead from like fourth place. I think he ended up qualifying P4. He was able to get just almighty start and was able to jump Alonso and Perez to take second place at the start, not making the same mistake that he did in the sprint race. And it was pretty quiet for basically about the first, about half of the race. However, Bottas had an engine failure on a lap 26 in turn 11, which resulted with the car getting stuck in gear, which is a new one. But I guess pieces of a Sauber getting stuck is not exactly off-brand for 2024. But the way that Race Controlled handled this was super duper clumsy. Initially, it was just double yellow flags in that section, basically F1's equivalent of a local yellow, which then devolved into a virtual safety car, which then turned into a full safety car. And it's just, like I said, very odd, very, very clumsy. Not really sure. It's like we should have probably just started with a VSC and then moved to a full safety car if need be. But clearly the stewards disagreed. But this all triggered a few pit cycles because the Red Bulls pitted under yellow, the RBs pitted under safety car rather, and a few other folks. I mean, I think the Aston Martins did too. And this created basically bunching everybody up. It was just absolute bedlam at the start of the restart rather. Technically, they actually hadn't taken the restart yet when Stroll just drives into the back of Ricciardo.
Yeah, he pulled the same move that one LMP3 did last year at Sebring, running into the back of the Porsche 963. I mean, Lance Stroll saw that and was like, "Yeah, I can do that."
Yeah, well, he did a very good job because he wrecked like 3 race cars in the process. Ricardo's was rear diffuser was just like gone. And then, this is the part that I still can't figure out. I'm assuming Piastri must have been ahead of Ricardo because Piastri's rear diffuser was also like toast. It was one of the strangest concertina effects I think I have ever seen in Formula One. Um, but yeah, and I guess that didn't end the pain for the V-Carb drivers because in turn 6 after the restart, Kevin Magnussen just went like full attack mode on Yuki and just spun him in turn 6. It's like, bro, you had all of that open track and you find the one car that's there. But this took out both of the RBs, the Racing Bulls. I still hate that team name. And that was a double DNF for them, unfortunately. Kind of again as mentioned, and also it's worth noting that this would actually bring out a second safety car as a direct result of this. I'm not sure that the brakes had even cooled on the GT Black series from the first round before it was sent back out to run again, and it was actually quite an extended safety car duration the second time. According to race control, there was debris in turn 14, I do believe, but none of the drivers, they were like, "There's nothing here." So I'm not quite sure what actually was the responsible for that extended second safety car, but in fairness, everybody would calm down quite significantly afterward because there wasn't really a whole lot there afterward. And we would pretty much run to the finish. Perez would end up P3. Again, a poor start let Lando particularly through. And then right after pitting, he lost a little bit, actually, ironically, lost a little bit more time in the pits. And then he basically burned up his hards trying to get around Leclerc after the restart, which he would end up doing, but it was just too late to catch Lando by that point. Lando had just driven off into the distance. Leclerc actually one stopped and was able to nab a P4 up from qualifying P6. However, Alonso spent the day basically slipping down the order, qualified P3. But just a really silly tire strategy. It started on mediums, which I mean, okay, fine, whatever. And then under the first safety car, pitted for softs, which is not the move at Shanghai. I'm not quite sure who thought that was a good idea. Because it was the same thing. The extended second safety car basically means that all the folks on either mediums or hards who basically just had to nurse them to the finish, their tires were in way better shape, and in a lot of ways, it kind of nullified the grip advantage, or to a large extent nullified the grip advantage of running on softs. So I don't know what was up with that, and he would end up pitting for mediums on lap 44, 45 to finish out the race, and he would come back on basically a bit of an overtaking drive for that final stint and would finish P7, but not great. And Lewis recovered up from P18 to P9, which all things considered really isn't bad. This year's Mercedes is kind of a dog again, and so to pick up 9 spots on the road is impressive. And Russell would end up finishing P6. And that's pretty much kind of it for race day. Now it's worth noting that this year's Chinese Grand Prix was just flipping penalty corner. So Stroll had a plus 10-second penalty for the multi-car collision before the first restart. Not super surprising. Sargent got plus 10 for a safety car infringement. Apparently, right at the safety car line after it had been deployed, he overtook Gasly leaving the pits when he should have actually fallen into line. And that netted him plus 10. Magnussen was plus 10 for annihilating Yuki. Well, fair enough. And Daniel got a three-place grid drop for Miami for overtaking Hulkenberg under safety car. Which is like, wow, okay. It's funny enough because even post race, even Sky Sports broadcast thought that Hulkenberg was in trouble, and then Hulkenberg said, "No, it was for Ricardo, not me." And they were like, "You sure about that?" And as it turns out, yeah, he was absolutely right. Um, yeah, and to be fair, I read that bit of the sporting code. Apparently, he had overtaken Hulkenberg, at least according to the Stewart's inquiry. Ricardo had overtaken Hulkenberg because Hulkenberg had overtaken Ricardo earlier. But apparently, as opposed, I think it was Article 55, subsection 8, I think, of the sporting regs, basically says that it's okay. I'm not going to get into FIA rulebook legalese because that's really boring. But point being is that it was fine, but Ricardo did it. It wasn't. So wherever Ricardo qualifies, he will take a 3-place drop in a couple weeks in Miami. And
It's so
also,
funny because this reminds me of that one F1 race that was like either last year or like a year or two ago, where it was like everybody, there were so many, like, I think it was instead of just like random penalties, it was like track limit infringements. Like there were so many track limit violations that like they literally had to just like stop giving out penalties and wait until the race was over to sort through them all. So like it reminds me of this.
yeah, I can't remember where was that.
I want to say it was the Red Bull race.
I
That
think
one.
it was, yeah, and yeah, yes, it was the Red Bull Ring. Yep, because it was, yeah, you're absolutely right. It was just so many penalties.
Because I remember notably, like another whole series had the same issue with track limits there
Mhm.
too.
Yep, you are absolutely right. Yeah, it was kind of a similar thing. And, sort of to this point, there were a boatload of penalty points that got handed out to these folks' license. Perez got in trouble for, I'm not really sure what. Sargent, it was for the safety car infringement. Stroll, again, for the multi-car pileup that he caused just before the restart. Alonso for his shenanigans during the sprint race. Lewis for his shenanigans with Piastri during practice. And I'm not sure what Russell got bopped for, but Russell got a couple of penalty points
He just got a
after the
penalty
weekend.
for being annoying.
Yeah, that's probably true. But the point
I
is
didn't know
that,
the penalties extended that long. Like, so Perez, his penalty expires on September 17th of this year.
yeah,
Like, what?
yeah, they do.
Like, at this point, this is like probation.
It really is. Yes, the penalty points stick around for quite a while. Um, and and to what I kind of the later point is that Sargent and Perez particularly are one really bad race weekend away from a one race ban because it's
It's
12
like
penalty points.
Gasly. I really wanted to see Gasly get a race ban, not because I don't like him or anything. I just wanted to see it happen because I thought it'd be funny because last season he was super close. He was the one who was racking up penalties like it was nothing. And I was like, yeah. And then people were like, oh, yeah, he's like pretty close to a race ban. I'm like, I want to see that happen. Like, I feel like it'd just be funny.
Yeah, I think he ended last year. I think it was 10 penalty points is where he ended up ending last year, and 12 is what it takes to trigger. But yeah, Perez and Sargent, yeah, like I said, they are truly one bad weekend away from a one race ban. Uh, I know, well, at least I don't know if you can still do this anymore. For a long time, it was if you protested, it would effectively be a suspended one race ban, basically the race ban being suspended until they figured it out. But if the FIA found you still in breach, even after the appeal, then you would get upgraded because that was what happened to. It was in the late 90s. Was it Mika Hakkinen or Michael Schumacher? Because both of them were menaces in the late 90s. And they one of them again triggered a race ban and tried to appeal. The FIA suspended it under appeal and then was like, actually, no, you're still an idiot. So now here's a 3 race ban instead of the one. Um, but I know that after Mahavir Raghunathan, after he absolutely took the piss with the penalty point system in 2018, I guess that would have been now. I know that they really tightened up the way that the penalty point system works as a direct result of that. So I don't know if it's still possible to try to push it off, but yeah, no, I am. It would be really funny if, particularly if Perez got a got a one race ban because he did something silly. But yeah, I guess we'll have to kind of see what happens. To be fair, next round on the calendar is Miami. Very silly things happen at Miami quite regularly, so it's not out of the ordinary that somebody is going to add to this total here on the list. And I guess we'll pick this up there. At least as of the time of this recording, there hasn't been anything particularly interesting on the news cycle side. So yeah, I guess we'll leave that there. But until next time, folks, we have been your hosts, Danny and JT, and you have listened to another episode of Chicanery. Until next time, everyone.